Hello, and thank you for joining in today on the webinar on the topic of critical elements of an organizational well-being and performance strategy. My name is Stéphanie Boivin. My pronouns are she and her. I'm calling from Montreal, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that Montreal is located on unceded Indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodian of the lands and the waters in the Montreal region. I am with Wellness Works Canada, your nonprofit workplace wellbeing and performance association and a network of workplace wellbeing practitioners. We support organizational well-being practitioners and employers in building a healthy, high-performing work culture. If you're not a member yet, I encourage you to check out the options. We are a community of like-minded people that aim to support a healthy work culture. Many of the resources that you see here today, the webinars, are made possible thanks to our member. And of course, there are loads of benefits that you get when you become a member with us. You get to access hundreds of resources, on-demand webinars, networking opportunities, and discounts to over 5,000 partners through Percopolis. The accreditation can help you develop those competencies you need to make an impact in your workplace or the workplace you work with, and to help you work towards the vision of a healthy population and high-performing economy, one organization at a time together. Now, our next session starts January 5th, and you can learn more at WellnessWorks Canada-certification. Now, for housekeeping, for today's session, when using the chat, you can post the comments to all the attendees or only to the panelists if you want to remain anonymous. Please also feel free to use the reaction at the bottom of the screen to agree, applaud, or react to what you're hearing. Now let's get started. Today we have Victoria Granger, founder and CEO of WellnessWorks Canada. Victoria is an award-winning entrepreneur recognized for her social impact. She's an educator, fitness enthusiast, mom, and passionate advocate for the impact of well-being has on performance. She has worked in the field of health promotion and population health for over 20 years. She has supported countless public and nonprofit and also private organizations in developing, implementing, and evaluating comprehensive organizational well-being strategies to create environments where people and businesses can thrive. She has an executive master's degree in business administration and a bachelor's degree in physical education. She's also a charter professional in human resource, CPHR, a trained personal trainer, a weight loss and nutrition coach, and a triathlon athlete. Now, don't forget to have a good time today. It's nice seeing you all here, and I am going to pass it over to Victoria for the rest of the session.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the really warm welcome. And it is so great to have so many people here today. I think we had a pretty great turnout. I think we're around 230 people registered. So I think this is an important topic for us to be talking about. So as you're joining, just please throw in the chat where you're calling from. And also, if you can share in the chat as well what your biggest concern for your workplace is right now, that will be great, and we'll be able to integrate that into the conversation that we have today to support the conversation. And so while you're doing that and just throwing in where you're calling from and or what your biggest concern your workplace is facing, I just want to share with you a couple of statistics that we've been seeing in workplace health and well-being in general. So some of this is maybe not surprising. You know, we know that obviously the pandemic has impacted mental health of most people. We know that we're working in a hybrid environment, most workplaces. And so this changes and shifts how we approach and how we support people. It takes a lot more effort to foster connection. There's so many different things that we need to pay attention to. And also, interestingly, Aon did a lot of research around workplace well-being efforts and have found that workplaces are doing more to support employee well-being, yet well-being is going down. So we're going to talk about this and why this may be. Of course, there's more factors than just the workplace, but I think it's an important thing to pay attention to. And also, you may have heard and seen that through a very recent 2023 Canadian Public Health Workforce Survey indicated that about 78.8% of workers are meeting the criteria for burnout of those respondents. That is huge. And so clearly there's something that needs to be done to help to support people. And of course, as well, we've seen from other research and reports showing that 84% of respondents are saying that it's the workplace conditions that are contributing to at least one mental health challenge. And so, of course, it's really important that we stop and then we think about how we can support people to be well and to perform well, and of course, do no harm. We don't want to be the contributor of our mental health issue, but we also, I think it's pretty smart to want to support people's well-being and mental health, because it's going to be something that can support them to perform, work effectively, do their job in light of all the things that are going on. We're still seeing a lot of people recontemplating, their purpose and meaning in life. And we really need to be able to support them so that we can retain them and help support people. So thank you so much for the chat. I hear people are coming in from all over the place: Ontario, Edmonton, another Ontario, rural Alberta, Nova Scotia, Ottawa, awesome, Saskatchewan, perfect, Barbados, nice. I wish I was there right now. We finally have snow. It's we've been waiting forever in Alberta. I'm in Alberta, Treaty 6 territory, and we haven't had snow until just 2 days ago, which was almost a little concerning because there's the issues with climate change and all of that. Okay, more people from BC. I'm seeing some concerns here as well coming in around biggest concern is about the hidden mental health issues. Yeah, they're not being addressed or even recognized. That is so true. Often we put our best foot forward when we go into the workplace. And so it's hard to recognize the signs, symptoms. How do we support people when we don't even maybe know if they need support? Another challenges here is the impact of customers or residents' behavior, aggression on employees' psychological health and safety. Yeah, huge burnout, isolation. Awesome. Lots of interest, lots of big things that we need to pay attention to. Supporting psychological health and safety. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Some people are some training and doing some good work around this area. Around disability policies and how they impact workplace mental health. Huge issue. We have a webinar coming up just about that, around disability policies and also accommodation and how to support people if they're going off and returning. So you'll want to tune in for that. That one's with Debbie Permain in January. So I hope you can join for that one. And then, other challenges, integrating psychological health and safety management systems within the overall OHS system. Yes, perfect. Okay, we're definitely going to be talking about that. Health sector, deeply impacted by the pandemic for sure, and the psychological well-being. Okay, thank you everyone for putting in more information. And is it snowing right now in Calgary? Thanks. Yeah, it finally feels like Christmas. Great. And more around disability policies. And then also someone around mentioning here around speculation around if people would keep their jobs. When an American company bought your company. And mistrust, huge. Those are big factors. Change and how do you manage that? So I hope we get to most of this. If we don't get to all of it, we're going to point you in the right direction for further information and resources as we move forwards. So thank you and welcome everyone. So I just want to start before we get straight into some of the learning outcomes that I think that it's becoming clear that in a lot of places, not everywhere, that the way we are working isn't working as well as it could. And in fact, there's actually a book with this very title, The Way We're Working Isn't Working, by Tony Schwartz. And it's the reason being is that, technological advancements are growing exponentially. The way we are working today looks different than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. we live in a knowledge economy where we're consuming about 34 gigabytes of information and data every single day. That adds up to about reading like one of the Hobbit's book, which is 95,000 words in one day. Like that's how much information we're consuming. And we're living, so this has an impact on our mental health. And so we have to shift the way we work in order to consume. Like our brains have literally adapted and are now starting to prune extraneous information because it is so difficult to maintain attention, and our attention is really our currency in order to be able to effectively do our jobs and do our work. There's shifting values around what has happened through the pandemic. And so basically, I think what's happening is that the demand for our attention and for the work and the change that we're trying to deal with is starting to exceed our capacity as human beings. And so we need to rework and think about how can we support people to perform sustainably, have sustainable high performance, and focusing in on the long game versus always really the short-sighted, well, no, we just have to do this and we've got to do it now. But then what happens is we start running a sprint even though we're running a marathon at sprint pace, and it's just not sustainable, as we've seen from the statistics and the rates of burnout. And so we need to be supporting people through that. So what we're going to talk about today are some of the major components that we need to be thinking about when we're trying to support our people, how we can really truly influence culture and identify those main drivers of our culture in terms of how we can support our people. We're going to talk about alignment. So that was one of the things that came up in the chat. How can we align what we're doing, starting a well-being program or a psychological health and safety strategy or a equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging strategy or innovation strategy, all these different things. If we're doing them all separately and they're just appendages, it's not going to be sustainable. They're going to be easily cut off. They're not going to be integrated. They're not going to be woven into the culture in terms of how you do your work every day. And so we really, really need to align the work. And so I've got one really great practical tip that Stephanie and I were talking about earlier, and I hope this is something that's going to help people to integrate and align. And then, of course, we're going to talk about some practical things we can do. And also incredibly important is this is not just an employer responsibility. It is just not HR's responsibility or the well-being coordinator's responsibility or the psychological health and safety advisors. It's everyone. Like we need to have shared empowerment and accountability and own our pieces. And so we'll talk about how we can support that as well. So that's a lot. It's a lot to talk about. So hopefully we get through it all, and we will be sharing a lot of resources afterwards that you can use as well. So let's talk about some of the components and how they align. Before we get into that, I want to definitely define like what is well-being and what does that encompass in terms of psychological health and safety, and these other important factors, and how does performance tie into this. And I think it's clear to identify what these things are and what the aim is because, like as we saw from the Aon research, efforts are going up, but well-being is going down. So something is amiss, something is going on. And so we need to learn how to better effectively support our people. And of course, I mean, the caveat is there are external factors, not just the workplace, that are impacting well-being. Of course, the economy, inflation, the pandemic, there's a lot going on, everything that's happening out in the Middle East. There's a lot of things that are impacting people's well-being. And thanks for the comment. We can share a copy of the PDF of the presentation afterwards. We'll follow up with a link to the recording as well. Okay, so let's define well-being. So the National Wellness Institute had a great definition for it that they presented at their conference last year. And I love it because it's so simplistic to remember. And it's really just the outcome of it, of what is happening if you are experiencing well-being versus kind of just thinking about all the things that go into it. And they define it as the ability to function optimally in any given environment. Now, of course, well-being and performance go hand in hand, because if you want to successfully accomplish your actions, your tasks, your functions in your work, then you need to be well. You have to be well to do well. It is truly kind of a given. We have a lot of stressors in our day-to-day lives, and In order to function optimally, and to do our jobs well, we have to be well. And so it's so important that we pay attention to this aspect of something that is critical, mission critical for supporting our people and our organization to function and thrive. And also, of course, we are living in a bit of a gig economy where people switch jobs every, couple of years. And it's not like it used to be where like my dad's had the same job for 30 years, 35 years. This doesn't happen anymore. The days of command and control are out. The days of employee voice are in. And so we need to be supporting our people if we want to maintain them. I mean, this cost of rehiring and turnover is staggering. So the more we can help our people and prevent them from burning out and just going to another job because they're like, nope, that's it, the better. So it's definitely in our best interest to pay attention to this. So again, there are also, I wanted to point out that in a lot of different sectors and industries, different authority figures and bodies are looking at well-being as an indicator of prosperity versus just our GDP. And same thing within the workplace. We're starting to look at that. And what we're actually doing at WellnessWorks Canada as well, and I'll share more about this in a minute, is that we are developing a worker well-being and organizational performance index that aligns some of these other indexes. So there's a Canadian index for well-being. There's OECD, the UN is doing some important work. There's a lot of work that's being done. And I think aligning this for the workplace is, again, so that we're not always reinventing, will be something that will be helpful for folks. So I'll share a little more information on that in a minute. But this diagram goes through a few of the different components of well-being. And there's different dimensions. There's about 6 dimensions according to the National Wellness Institute, Canadian Center for Disease and Control, World Health Organization. They all have different kinds of dimensions that they look at, but they're all very similar. And what I just want to share here is that they are very much intertwined. They're very much interdependent, and the workplace absolutely impacts many of them. Of course, occupational well-being and our intellectual well-being is definitely impacted by the workplace, of course, right? Our social well-being is hugely impacted. There's 40 years of research from Gallup that says having a best friend at work is an indicator of engagement, which is a precursor for performance. So our social well-being at work it's highly intertwined with our well-being and ability to perform. Of course, our psychological health and safety is, having a psychologically healthy and safe workplace will in itself address parts of supporting equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, things like that. And of course, on the other aspect, within the workplace, you may say, well, where does the line begin and where does the line end? And is it really our responsibility to manage mental health problems? Or is it really our responsibility to support physical activity or nutrition or sleep? Well, I think the first rule of thumb is the workplace does have responsibility to do no harm, always. So if people are working shift work and, that's disrupting sleep, or crazy, or there's bullying and harassment, or all of these things, or people do not have space in their day to take a break to actually eat or to move from sitting, or sit from standing, or all of these things, and their safety is impacted and their well-being is impacted, then yeah, that's something that we want to pay attention to. But on the flip side, if we want to support people to do better work as well, we also have to think about the things that will impact them. So of course, there's a sense of personal responsibility that people have. And people need to try to support their own well-being the best that they can as well. But we also know that the environment heavily influences the choices that we make day to day. And so if we set up an environment where, yeah, people can't take breaks, people can't connect with each other, there's isn't civility or respect, there's again no opportunities for breaks, all of this stuff is going to impact us. And then then we're also going to know that when people are not well, they're not getting any sleep, the risk of injury is going to go up, the risk of errors is going to go up, the mental competence is going to go down. Like there are so many different factors. And so the last really important factor here is around meaning and purpose. And at work, if you're trying to create a culture that really supports people to have a sense of belonging, have a sense of inspiration, and to be engaged, they need to be connected to a purpose at their work. And this supports spiritual well-being as well. And so, you may not always think these things are connected, but really they are. So from a legal perspective, there is, of course, we have to do no harm, but we also have to be proactive in terms of setting people up for success, having committees, having representatives, taking precautions, training people, making sure people know how to use equipment and all that kind of thing, follow procedures, and have support and different standards to support them as well. And of course, the place that fitting psychological health and safety most makes sense is in OHS, because there is a management system in place that we can utilize in terms of assessing psychological and psychosocial risk factors, as well as potentially other risk factors that impact well-being. And so that is one place that it can fit. Absolutely. But we're going to talk about even at a higher level in a minute here in terms of how we can support this integration throughout the entire organization. But before we get into that, I also want to say that, of course, it is a shared responsibility, that the employee also has rights and has duties to maintain their balance, set those boundaries, but they also need to be set up for success. So it's a shared kind of responsibility. And oftentimes, having a toolkit or something that clearly defines and ingraining this even into the performance development process, a proactive, positive process, can help to set people up for success when they know that, hey, this is my role and this is my responsibility in terms of clarifying, roles or work, or speaking up, etc. So again, it is a shared responsibility. So I'm going to do a quick poll here, because I just want to share, there are so many different types of models out there. And this is through CPHR. This is a new competency framework, and it kind of shares the types of competencies that people need to have. And the biggest ones that people need to have here are organizational relationships and wellness. What a big step forwards. This is one of the three major competencies. They're incorporating well-being and wellness and relationships. It's key to helping people successfully work together. But then you also have one for integrated talent management, and of course, strategic development of the organization, which is also an incredibly important one, because this is very much tied to and shows that this is a strategic imperative and not just something, it's not just hiring and firing people, right? It's something that's actually really critical to supporting people. So I'm just going to do this quick poll here, and I want you to respond. What kind of strategies do you have in place to support your people, and check all that apply here and just because there are so many, right? As you can see, as you're scrolling down and trying to answer this question, there's one for learning and development, OHS, equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, or something similar, psychological and safety, ESG, well-being, performance. Maybe you have one that encompasses everything, innovation, etc. And so then when you're done that question, and I see all the answers coming in here, then we'll go to the next one to think about what kind of strategies your organization is exploring to better support its people. And the responses are anonymous, so don't worry about that. We won't be harassing you afterwards. No one else will know who answered what. Awesome. So far, yeah, the numbers are still coming in. And yeah, and if there's something in here that you are doing that isn't on here, yeah, feel free to throw that in the chat as well. So thank you in the responses here, working with Exec. Okay. We'll just give it a half a minute more. And I didn't even put like the technology piece. There's so many in here. Having positive space training. Oh, that's interesting, Larissa. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so far, I think I will share the responses here. Most people have responded. So far we're seeing here that the majority, okay, I'm going to share the responses so you can all see them. So 79% have something for learning and development, and of course 75% for OH&S. And then EDIs follows that with 57%. And then psychological health and safety. Wow, 38% of you, that's great. I think if you weren't attending this webinar, or sorry, if we were talking about something totally different, the numbers may be different. We're all skewed. We're all interested in this topic. 15% are looking at something around sustainability. 53% have a strategy for well-being. That's impressive. But 70% for performance, so more so. And only 20% have an overarching strategy that encompasses all of these. And then 19% innovation. Okay. And then the ones that we're exploring here, the biggest one here, 53% is around psychological health and safety, if you don't have that yet. And then also 29%, that's great to see, an overarching people and culture strategy that encompasses them all, followed by sustainability, ESG, and then OHS and EDI. Okay, so that's great. So thank you for sharing. So it's a lot, right? Like, isn't it a lot? Like, no matter how big your organization is, having a separate strategy for all of these components can be a lot. And what happens, and sometimes we see happening in different organizations, is that if we have something that is very separate and it's not integrated and woven into the work that we do, into our overarching strategy, then what happens is it's an appendage, and it's something that can easily get cut off. Or when funding is short, it might get cut off. We saw that happen in WestJet recently. All wellness, EDI, everything, everyone gone. There's other obviously factors, but it happens in companies when it's something that's separate and not integrated. And so the end goal is to have it integrated, and to not even have it just integrated into your people and culture strategy or your HR strategy, but a step above that into your overarching organizational strategy that you use to you report to your stakeholders. So I want to share here with you as well the U.S. Surgeon General's framework for workplace mental health and well-being. It is a huge step in the right direction. And you're going to notice something quite interesting. At the very center of it is worker voice and equity. That is the center. And so you can see, I think a lot of times there's controversy around it, of like, how much voice, where do we cut a line, how much is too much? But it is something that is really critically important to support people within all of these other pieces. And so, you can see here, obviously protection from harm is critical. You want to make sure that people don't have physical or psychological harm. Interestingly, security is something here is around making sure that people feel financially secure in their job future. Another one here is around connection and community. Connection is so important. It's around having a sense of social support and having that sense of belonging. Then we also have here work-life harmony, balance, again, part of the psychological health and safety standard, making sure that there's a sense of autonomy for people. And then there's flexibility for them, huge trend moving forward. This just came out in 2023, brand new. Then we also have opportunity and growth, which is around supporting learning and accomplishment. So there's so many pieces here. I love that. Thank you, Matthias. Absolutely. We always have, in fact, I think that's like the closing note for today. We have to create with, not for, 100%. Yeah, it is such an important aspect, truly. So these are some of the components here as well. So this is another potential framework, but I also wanted to share with you that what we've been doing at Wellness Works Canada is developing a worker well-being and organizational performance index, and having our advisors put a lot of who are experts, like true experts in this field, to put in feedback and to align all of the work that's being done with a Canadian focus, but also with a performance focus, and to ensure that this is aligned, because the number one barrier that we see for adoption and supporting well-being and supporting a thriving culture is stakeholder engagement and buy-in. And if you can't get everybody 100% on board, and you're trying to teach something or preach something that they're not on board with, it's not going to work effectively. But if we can align it to the goals of the organization, and it's really around supporting that performance, then oftentimes we'll have better buy-in and take up for that. So I just want to share with you some of the pieces here that are categorized here that align the Canadian Index for Wellbeing, the Government of Canada's Quality of Life Indicators, the UN's United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, their SDGs, also aligns with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. They have pretty comprehensive work that they're doing within well-being, and of course the US Surgeons Workplace for Mental Health and Well-being. And so we've divided up here so far into 9. It's not finalized yet. There is an opportunity. We want to welcome member input and feedback on this. There's obviously a lot more than just what this slide shows, but if anyone is interested in being involved within this process, just please reach out to us. Email us at admin@wellnessworkscanada.ca, and we would love to also hear feedback on this piece as well. But I think another really important piece that's sometimes missing when we think about, okay, what are the components, is that there's a number of success factors that are just as important. Like how you do something is just as important as what you're doing. And so again, to his point, Tyus, is that you need to include people in this decision. You need to have leadership commitment. You have to have two-way communication and voice from people, like Voice as a Center, US Generals, OECD voice, employee voice is a critically important component. It's so important, as well as making sure that there's clear vision and empowerment so that we can all own this. And I would also say integration with what you're already doing is going to be really important. So when we're thinking about what is just as important as how, you need to also think about not just the critical components, and we'll talk about how you can define what's going to be most important for your organization in a bit, but you also have to think about the critical systems. Like, what are the systems that are actually going to make this move forwards? And how can we align this so that we take an approach that's just going to support people through it versus just creating something for them, and how can we integrate it? So one of them is, of course, you need to have an assessment. You need to understand where you are at. What is the readiness? What do people need? What do they feel their issues are? And if you can integrate that into existing things like your engagement surveys or your whatever things that you already have, then that'll be easier. If you have the capacity and there isn't survey fatigue to do an additional one, then by all means do that. But if you're trying to simplify and streamline, integrate it into one and just add some of those components and measure some of those psychological health, safety, and overall well-being factors that impact performance as well, that we talked about in the last slide. Then we also need to think about all of our existing policies. Yes, we may have one we probably have one for OHS, but how can we just adopt this? Safety is physical and psychological. And how can we support that health and safety? And, what are the programs that we have in place? What are the training that we have in place? And, what kind of benefit programs do we have? What kind of accommodation processes do we have? And also very important that we don't always think about are, what about the daily practices? What are the things that we do every day that impact people that aren't part of formal program or strategy or system that's in place? All of that is really important. And I think one of the best ways, and we're going to talk about this in just a little bit, is to make sure that we have a well-being lens to everything we do in our organization, something that supersedes and helps you discern, no matter what it is you're doing, whether it's change, whether it's innovation, whether it's a merger, whether it's a new policy, a new training program, a new mandated return to work, all of these things. How is this going to impact people, and what are the protective factors that you can put in place to support people through things that may impact their well-being? So I'm going to share a tool that we can use for that in a little bit. But first, I think we need to also really think about making sure that we're focused on culture. Culture, it's the most important thing that we need to impact when we're thinking about well-being, or whatever term we want to use for organization. And oftentimes we don't always have a plan that will really help to support this. And, I think Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. But of course, we can also have a strategy for our culture. And I think it's really important, because it's really the culture that's going to impact all of these things, whether we have lost time errors, whether we have inspired people, whether or not people have a sense of social capital, they're productive, that we support customer experience, all of these things. And on top of that, it's also going to support revenue growth, employment growth, stock price growth, revenue, all of these things. So it's in a very, very, very important aspect. But given that there are so many different models out there and so many components that we can pay attention to, I think one of the most important things that you can try to think about is to create a bit of a model for your organization to determine what are the key drivers that are impacting my culture. Now, is it the leadership philosophy? Do we have the sense of, work until no matter what cost, or is it one that we have to be well to do well? What is that philosophy? What is the mantra that we use to guide our work every day? And having a little mantra, having a charter of code or of behavioral competencies and all these different things can really help to support us to do better. Is it maybe the job characteristics? How can we support people through that? What about the daily practices, how we show up every day, whether we're working hybrid or in person or whatever it looks like? What do people have the resources and capabilities, not only to do their job, but to be well? Do they have mental support, social support? And what about the training? Is that a driver? So these are just examples. Although I would say the philosophy one is a pretty important one. But I would encourage you to think about what are the key drivers that are impacting my organization and my culture, and then shape those to make sure that we can support the culture to be one that can inspire people, that can support psychological health and safety, that can support agility given our rate of change and the knowledge economy and all that, and support us to perform. And then that will help us to have better effective work, better quality of products, better quality of services, was going to enhance our customer experience, our reputation, and of course, our financial health. Now, no matter where you sit in this, there's a lot of different things that we can think about in terms of how we support our organization. So if you do not feel like you're in a position where you can create the influence you need, also think that if you change yourself, you can change the world, and you can be that change that you wish to see through that contagion of impact in terms of how you show up every day. And Drew Dudley's got some great talks in terms of a good TED Talk. One of them is the lollipop moment, and sometimes it's the little things that we do that we don't even know has a huge impact on our team and our colleagues. And so the more that we can model authentically our psychological safety, how we're vulnerable, how we can speak up, how we can be curious, and how we can exercise good boundaries and all of these things, that can help to support our immediate departments and our teams, and it can span out and have a ripple effect. It'll take a little bit longer, but it absolutely will work as well. So just remember how much influence that you can have as well. So I also want to share here. Thank you so much, Steph, for sharing that link to the. Oh, I think it just went to host and panelists. If you could share it to everyone, that would be great. To the Drew Dudley talk. Yeah, it's a great one. So when we're thinking about alignment and reinvention, oftentimes, we have a program or strategy that's an appendage, and we want to embed it in business as usual. Now, when we think about the current way organizations are structured, oftentimes, we'll have our board or CEO, we'll have our SLT, ELT, whatever they're called, executive, And then under that, we're going to have the lines of business or departments, we're going to have our finance, our operations, HR, etc. And oftentimes we'll have something around external that's like marketing or communications, and ESG might fit in that. It might be up here, all kinds of different ways of looking at it, of course. But what I would encourage is that we reinvent and reimagine how we can shape and frame our organizations where well-being is something that is embedded with only with what we do internally, but also with what we do externally, in terms of also thinking about sustainability and just supporting even our clients and our customers and our patients or residents or whoever we're serving. Because if we don't take the same approach with everything, and we know we're exposed to 34 gigabytes of information a day, and we're trying to send a message about how we have supposed to treat each other, and then how we're supposed to treat our customers, and all of this, if we can align it, it's going to be so much better. And so what can be a great way to do that is to have, yes, you're going to have your people and culture, of course, that are focused on the internal. And this may seem a little bit progressive, but also think about having a VP or executive or chief well-being officer that's really going to support both internal and external. And they need to have a voice of authority at the top to really influence things. So they're going to influence, of course, making sure that we're using a well-being lens with everything that we're doing, again, internally and externally. Brand is, for any organization, is a lifeline, and having alignment with what you're doing externally is so critical. People nowadays, they like organizations and brands. They will be an employee or a client or a consumer or a student or a resident or whatever it is, if they see alignment with their values. People are savvy and make choices based on that. And the more that we can align this piece to sustainability goals or the equity, diversity, and inclusion, and overall well-being, the better. So if you're thinking about having someone at the high level, then I'm going to actually share with you here in the chat a link to a job description for someone who's working in this space. And so we've had input on this as well from our advisors. And the reason it's so critical is that oftentimes organizations hire someone to coordinate or support equity, diversity, inclusion, or psychological health and safety, or well-being. And they don't always have all the tools. They're not always set up for success because the description of their role isn't where it needs to be. And so what the main objective of a person in this role needs to be is that they're facilitating a culture where the organization is going to thrive externally as well as internally. They're a strategic partner that helps to facilitate, that works collaboratively with all stakeholders to, again, prevent harm, manage risks, promote a positive, healthy, safe, productive work environment. And again, they're going to do that by dovetailing business unit strategies with people's needs. And they're going to take a systems approach by assessing, stakeholder priorities and employee needs to make sure that all of the systems and everything that is done within the organization are measurably positioned to achieve the best solutions for all in terms of supporting their well-being, and is going to empower leaders and create shared empowerment and support to have an organization, again, where all can thrive. And they need to be like a consultant or equal level to senior leadership, and to have the influence that can be really readily made. Now, it's not to say that if you're not set up in that position that you can't still make a big influence, but that's still your role, is to be a facilitator of change, not doing something for people, but really doing it with them and supporting that so that it's owned by all and aligned with everyone. And so this description goes through all of the competencies, the roles, the responsibilities, and this can help to support and educate the employer or your supervisor or your boss to understand what this role is. It's not to create walking programs, or maybe to do hazard risk assessments and stuff are very important. That's an important aspect, but it's not about just doing adding new programs or new things. It's really around reshifting and refocusing everything that we're doing so that we have a lens of well-being, and that we're not only not doing harm, but actually we're supporting people to thrive. So practically, what might that look like? Well, it is really around this discernment process. I would encourage, this is one of the simplest things that any organization can do to embed it into everything that you're doing, whether you have someone on board or not. And it is around having this example here that's on the screen is an ethical discernment process. But basically what you would be doing is using a well-being discernment process, and you go through the rigor and the process of making sure that you are engaging people and developing this process with, not just for, again, and that you are looking at utilizing it to clarify and have everyone use a well-being lens with every decision that is made within the organization. Any decision that may have an impact or action that's going to impact people. So whether it's collaborative arrangements, whether it's financial decisions, human resource decisions, operational decisions, any strategic plans, anything, if you can have basically, to nail it, to simplify it, it's really asking, will this action, whatever it is, does it have the potential to harm, physical or psychological well-being? And if it does, then you have to implement protective factors, or maybe pivot. Maybe we change that decision. We rethink it. If it's neutral, maybe we don't need an action. We maintain regular supports. And if it's positive, again, we maintain the regular supports. So pulling it all together, we have to think about what are those factors. These factors can be protective factors, or they can be factors of harm. So this is an example of many of the psychological health and safety factors, as well as some other ones that we have in our well-being index, of making sure that we have, proper purpose, well-being, that there's flexibility, all of these different things. So I think it's just important to think about these factors and making sure that we have something that can prevent, support, or what are we going to do to help support someone in a reactive kind of place. So there's a lot there. I know there's a lot here. We will share a copy of the slides. But to simplify it again, what you do is as important as how you do it. And so when we're thinking about the critical components, it is something that needs to be ingrained with what we're already doing. So if you're assessing projects, programs, policies, employee needs, perceptions, you also need to include readiness to make shifts and change. That will be very important to set realistic expectations for yourself. You are also going to want to make sure that we have a ton of explicit communication and transparency that is two-way. And we also need to make sure that we integrate and create this shared empowerment for everyone as well. And we want to embed it within everything. And the simplest way to embed that is to have that discernment process that overlaps everyone, and that we have someone at that highest level that can help to support the work. And then, of course, we're going to want to think about the protective factors that we have based on employee responses of the main issues that are impacting their ability to be well and to perform well, whether the psychological health and safety factors or their employee voice or balance, all of those things. And maybe you want to have more training. Maybe you want to have a toolkit of empowerment. What I also think is very, very important is to embed this into the into the performance development process. The more that you can have behavioral competencies that share the shared responsibility of how we show up to support each other and ourselves, the better. It shows you take it really seriously. And another component here is to work smart, engage people, and educate people on how to be productive in terms of workload management. Like whenever we do assessments with organizations, workload management stress is like pretty much always number one issue. So supporting people with these tools is going to be really, really important as well. Making sure that people have the opportunities for breaks, because this is what happens to your brain without them. Also that you're supporting authentic connection, right? A U.S. General's framework, huge. It's a huge factor in today's world, especially if you're working hybrid or remote. It takes 3 times the effort to support connection at work. And so we can create that connection by giving employees voice, having, through recognition, through having those channels, having those opportunities. There's so many different things we can do. And of course, we can also, make sure that we offer flexibility and control and be the change and walk the talk and influence that through the contagion effect. Now, lastly, before we open up to questions, and I do see a couple of Q&A coming in, is that we need to create shared empowerment. It's incredibly important. If we do, no matter what role of influence you have, we also want to make sure that everyone throughout the organization is set up for success in terms of maybe utilizing the well-being discernment process or doing any other kind of work. And so we actually have a training program that is specifically focused on training and providing a certification for ambassadors or champions or activators or whatever term you want to use that reflects your culture, to help them to get the tools to understand the current state in their department, to understand, to get the tools and the resources to develop a plan to help support them to be effective and set them up success in terms of how having the evaluation metrics and knowing and how to know how they can do well. So that's really important piece. The last important piece, of course, is to have the shared iterative vision that was developed with people again, rather than for them, that we have team charters around behavioral expectations. And most organizations have some kind of organizational code of conduct. That is great, but I think it's really important to personalize it and co-create it at the department or team level to make sure it really makes an impact. And people, when they were a part of the process of developing it, they're going to be so much more involved and accountable and feel more empowered to actually living and breathing it. And lastly, having behavioral competencies, again, embedded into the performance development process as a way to encourage and support people to make sure that they're managing their workload, that they have that balance, that they're setting boundaries, all of the things that they need to set them up for success. And there's a few different questions that you can use that can help to support you in terms of developing a team charter. Deborah Connors has a couple of great ones, and I'll throw them in the chat. They are to think about, what is it we believe in and what do we value? Who are we when we're at our best? What do we want our culture to be? And are we solving problems or moving towards our vision? And then create the charter kind of based on that and thinking about, well, what do we, how can we be our best when we know who we are? And how can we achieve that working together? So again, the best way to create a thriving culture is to actually create it and to predict it. Don't sit idly by. Although I proposed a couple of different high level, maybe more innovative ways of doing things in terms of having a well-being discernment process that's applied to all decisions that are made within an organization. Having a well-being, a VP of well-being that looks at things externally as well as internally. All of these things are really important. Thinking about having, the charters, all of these different things are so important because only dead fish swim with the current. So we need to get with the times and we need to support people. We know that expectations of employees are becoming higher. They're higher needs because of what's going on in the world and the economy and with basically this eco-pandemic of mental well-being. And so, of course, we are here to help support you within any work you need. We're trying to reduce barriers. We have a membership that's only $100 for people leaders to access all of the tools and resources and everything like that. Accreditation programs for people who are leading the change to be set up for success and getting all the tools you need. Workplace training to give that power, to give that support as well. And lots of things. We also have an annual calendar, well-being calendar, with different themes of the month that align, again, with everything else, psychological health and safety, tools, performance factors, ESG, as well as just a number of things. And there's tips and tools for every single month. So you can plan your year out, but again, without the higher level impact and work, it may not be as effective as it could be. So I really encourage you to think about having a well-being discernment process, having someone at the position where they can be a facilitator of change and have that that empowerment as well. So I thank you all today. And again, here's my information if you want to follow up with me for more information. Thank you for the comments in the chat there, and I'll open it up to some questions as well. We have a couple of minutes here. So I do have one question from Bonnie here. Is wondering if we can speak to the issue of healthy boundaries and how supervisors, leaders, and organizations potentially can violate and breach individual values and sense of security, and that is financial and capacity to take care of basic needs. Yeah. So you know what, the U.S. Surgeon General's framework is great because it talks about some of these pieces as human needs. They're basic human needs, and we can't violate these things. And one of them is around autonomy and flexibility. That was a key. Those were two important components and factors. And so again, in terms of having these healthy things, there's a few different things that you can do. Again, going back to the having a toolkit where people are given verbiage and tools to help them set those boundaries can be helpful. So for example, the simple little things like the email signature that says, you know, like I'm not responding after hours, like the Ontario's right to disconnect legislation, which step in the right direction, still has its limitations, as sometimes these things do, but like empowering them and giving them anonymous ways to report violations is another important aspect. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into here. Yeah, so they need to be able to report it. And they also need to be empowered to be able to set those boundaries. And so often standardized tools can help. We all know that even if you have a standardized policy across the organization, not every supervisor is going to follow it. I've experienced that firsthand myself where, you know, there was a policy where you could work remotely for a day pre-pandemic, but some supervisors, or it was in government at that time, or ADM would be like, nope, not my department. Everybody needs to be here. I need to see them. And so even though there was a policy, I couldn't access it. So there needs to be an avenue to report that otherwise. And maybe that's just within the discernment process of these are the areas that impact, that can have the potential for harm, of not having the ability to disconnect, for example, and have it. And then when you're going through that, that's an actual that's something that can actually be addressed, because then we know what the protective factors are. We know what the accommodation looks like. We know how to support people through that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at the time. we're at our time. I know that was a lot of information, but thank you so much for all of the comments that are coming in through the chat. As we said before, we will be sharing a copy of this recording afterwards. We also have a number of great webinars coming up, so I encourage you to check those out online. And I just want to thank you all for being here, and wish you all the best and a warm, safe season. And yeah, thank you everyone for being here. So without further ado, I'll let you get on to your next engagement, and hope to see you at the next event. Thank you.